What's up, you all? Uh, this is Dominique Beaumonte, the host of the podcast Season with Salt. And I usually do not reserve space on my podcast to talk about sports, but I have decided that it is critical for me to address some specific concerns that I have about some of the things that are going on in the world with regard to my dear Oregon Ducks. And first of all, I think we can all agree that notoriety and visibility often require us to um, pay a price, right? The more visible we are, the more likely we are susceptible to people's positions, people's opinions, and there are a lot of lessons outside of um, what happened this weekend uh, on the field in Oregon that I think we need to unpack, right? Um, First of all, every Oregon fan is very excited about the win against Oregon State. I appreciated the community of folks that know me who were like, yes, you guys won. I think that that's, you know, it was a hard fought game. What I think is fascinating is the way that the narrative has been developed around some of the coaching decisions. Primarily, everybody's talking about the 12-man rule. So, in the event that you did not watch the game, essentially what happened was that uh, the uh, the during the final moments of the game, the Oregon coaching staff decided to um, take advantage of a loophole that they found out about perhaps while they were, studying the game, which was that they decided to have a 12th man on the field. And for those of you who are familiar, uh, in football, each team has 11 men on the field. So, by the fact that they had 12 men on the field, that is considered a live ball uh, um, foul, if you will. And it took time off of the clock, and it only cost the Oregon Ducks 5 yards, right? So, um, 5 yards, it ate up, I think, maybe 10 seconds. I don't even know how many seconds it ate up. So the narrative is going around is that um, there was some cheating going on. Now, if you know the history of Ohio State football, uh, they're some crybabies, right? And I don't mean to say that in a way like sometimes you lose and you just got to lose. And I get that it's hard to lose. And I get that, you know, when you consider um, what went into your losing the game, it's easy to focus on the things that somebody else did as opposed to your own coaching. At the end of the day, Ryan Day was outcoached by Dan Lanning, period. That's number one. Number two, nobody, this is just my perspective, but a perspective that I think we need to pay attention to. Nobody should be debating about the legality or the the taking advantage of a loophole or cheating or anything or saying that Oregon somehow paid off referees. Nobody should be having a discussion about that without considering the fact that if you watch the whole game, there was a very clear interception in the first quarter by an Oregon defender that went uncalled. No, there's no debate about that. You can go and watch the film. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. But I think I want to just first of all discuss the fact that the review of the 12-man violation, what happened in that review? According to the NCAA rules secretary, they first said, number one, that the referees were not at fault. They did their job, number one. So I think that that's important to note, that there was no inclination that the referees were cheating on behalf of the Oregon Ducks at all. It was clear that they were enforcing a rule. There were 12 men on the field. It was a live ball foul. They penalized the Oregon Ducks by 5 yards because somebody was saying, oh, yeah, like when, so anyway, they did this investigation and they found out that they determined that it was indeed a loophole that they needed to correct. And they didn't actually change the rule. They shared from the rules committee an interpretation of the rule that might not have been in alignment with what was understood before. So there's no changing of the rules. The Oregon Ducks had not been penalized for doing something wrong. It's just that somebody knew that with 12 men on the field, because people care about football, they knew that that meant that the clock would still be running. Okay. So let me just tell you that nobody has suggested that Oregon in any way cheated, right, or did anything that was wrong. But it just bothers me that one play in 3 seconds, right, is somehow like this idea that people have come up with this narrative that Oregon should have lost that game, but they do not take into consideration any other uh, issues with um, the the coaching or the refereeing that happened before that moment. And at the end of the day, Ohio State was outcoached. They failed to appropriately manage the clock at the end of the game. They benefited from a whole touchdown for a bad call when there was clearly an interception, and they still did not win. They were the last team with the ball. They had traveled down the field, right, in order to score and failed to do so. And it's not because of a loophole or or anything. It is simply because they were outcoached in the moment and could not seize the moment. So let's be clear about that. So the NCAA has come out and said that let me read I want to read their statement, what they said about the 12-man rule and their interpretation. Not a new rule. They had an interpretation. They reinterpreted for the sake of other people. And people and the narratives are all over the world. Like they closed the loophole. Did they close the loophole, or did they reinterpret something that was already said? So let me. So here's what Dan Lanning said about his decision. He said, "We spend an inordinate amount of time on situations, and some situations don't come up very often in college football, but this was obviously something that we had worked on," Lanning said. And you can see the result of what happened. So clearly, there's no like, did they do it on purpose or how did it happen? It was definitely planned. And then um, here is what the NCAA said. Well, I'm going to read to you from ESPN's article. They said in a release on Wednesday, the NCAA issued a new rule interpretation, not a new rule, but a new rule interpretation on how to handle a penalty for 12 players on the field in the final 2 minutes of either half. If the defense has 12 players actively participating in the down, the offense can choose, along with the 5 yard penalty, to have the game clock reset to the time that had been displayed at the snap. So, what they're saying is nothing has changed aside from the fact that the team on offense should be able to determine whether they want the time back or not. The offense may not want the time back, right? Depending on where the spread is. Now, let's be honest. They could have kicked a field goal without trying to do anything extra. But they, from my perspective, aside from bad clock management, they were just getting greedy, right? So I feel like in the world that we live in, especially in the world of sports, like there are these like sacred infrastructures that we don't want to see die. Some examples, for some reason, like we always think about the glory days of USC, and people love to say at the beginning, I don't care what year it is, I don't care who the coach is, people love to see USC in the top 10, in the top 15, in the top 20, not necessarily based on any type of production, but just based on who they are, what they have meant to college football over the last 20 years, et cetera, et cetera. Generally, and no shade to USC, generally they end up showing you that they are not as good as you want them to be, right? What are they, like 3-3 now? I think at one point they were like in the top 10. I don't know, but generally they are benefiting from people's perception about how good they could be based on whatever they have done in the past and whoever is their coach now. I even seen somebody saying, I don't want to get on a rabbit trail, but I seen somebody talking about how Lincoln Riley has all of these former quarterbacks playing in the NFL. What they failed to say is that those quarterbacks that he has playing in the NFL, with the exception of probably Caleb, all were Oklahoma football players, not USC football players, right? And to be honest, they experience, even Caleb experienced most of the successes that he had at Oklahoma, because he didn't have very much success at USC. So is it Lincoln Riley or is it Oklahoma? Is it USC or is it Oklahoma? I'd say the common denominator for the success of Lincoln Riley is definitely Oklahoma, because it's definitely not USC. But that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about Colorado. Now, Colorado was 3-0 last year around this time, or a little bit before this time last year. And the reason why Colorado has so much visibility is not because they're a great football team. Let's be honest. The reason why Colorado has so much visibility is because they have a star-studded coaching staff, and because of the NIL, they have a star-studded group of players, right? Now, if you look at like an Oregon or an OSU, maybe not a star-studded group of players, but definitely what folks have referred to as a $20 million roster, whatever. Oregon never said it had a $20 million roster. The athletic director at Ohio State said that they had a $20 million roster, which is neither here nor there, because as you know, you can have $1 million roster and it still doesn't mean you're going to win any games, clearly. So back to Colorado. Colorado came down to Oregon, got blown out, right? It was like 35-0 at the half. And people bought into this idea that, and I just wanted to say this too, because y'all made it really hard to be anti. Uh, I even forgot his name, Deion Sanders. Y'all made it very hard to be anti Deion Sanders uh, last year because the narrative was, oh, he's a black coach. We gotta put our now. There's lots of black coaches, right? Like that we haven't put our interest behind at all. But we said we had to put our interest behind Deion Sanders, and all the celebrities are going to be on the sideline for all the games, and we're just going to support Deion Sanders no matter what. Here's the problem: Deion Sanders could not win. Like I don't even want to go into Deion Sanders, but I want to say this: Deion Sanders alleged after the loss to Oregon, and you can Google this, Deion Sanders alleged that Oregon had some kind of like sneaky camera watching their practice and that Oregon somehow cheated and that's why they lost. Now, they were foolish enough to believe that somebody wouldn't look at their body of work over the entire 2023 season and think to themselves, so are you saying that the reason why you lost when you were 3-0 was because Oregon stole footage of your practice? But you're saying that all the other games, I don't know, would they win 3 or 4 games last year? Are you saying that all of those other losses are just, you just lost because you lost, right? So the problem is, I don't even know how I got on, I don't even know how I got this far, but I think the problem with college football sometimes is that we let these coaching personalities drive the narrative of how teams should be viewed, and we don't consider what they have done on the field. And I think that when I'm looking at teams being picked, and I recognize that Oregon is not some quietly naive little man in this whole discussion. I recognize that we've got millions of dollars. I think that somebody questioned Dan Lanning, and he said, "Hey, why should we be penalized because we have people that want to support our football team and our athletic program?" I get it. People support, the more support that you have, it's likely that you'll have more success. I get that. But I think it's important for us to remember that at the end of the day, the talent on your roster and the way that you are coached matters, because you can be the big man from Sunday to Thursday or Friday, but ultimately, if you cannot win on Saturday, then whatever it is that you're doing during the week doesn't matter. And I think that my point is that schools like USC and more recently Colorado and Ohio State, they have benefited from this reputation that they're going to be good. And then when they lose, it's never their fault. Like it's somehow or another, something happens, somebody, now their coach might get on at the immediate press release of the press conference after the game. They're going to get on there and say immediately after the loss that they recognize that that they're to blame. They had the wrong game plan. They should have worked harder. That it's a team sport and blah 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 blah. They're always going to say that. But through the week, you're going to start hearing things about they cheated or they got a bigger roster or somebody paid for something. If you're going to make any argument about how a game turns out, you need to thoroughly consider the team's preparation, number one, right? The way in which the team is coached is important. Then there is the game in real time, right? What happens during the game, right? What is the management of the clock? Like all of these things matter because you don't want to say that 3 seconds or one play or one call is the reason why somebody won or lost, right? You want to be realistic about a team's body of work. And that's just what's been bothering me all week because I'm tired of hearing about 12 men on the field. I'm tired of hearing that somebody's a genius and somebody's a cheater. I'm tired of hearing all these narratives that take away from the fact that every game you got to prepare your coach's reputation or notoriety or popularity has nothing to do with your because the coaches aren't even playing in the game. They're not even in the game. They're just barely at the game. So their uh, participation is important because you need a coach, right? That coaches your team. But more importantly, the team needs to buy into an idea and every play matters. Every play matters. So um, let me read to you what I'm gonna just stop harping on this, but I want to read to you what was noted. Also, one of the Ohio State, and I think sometimes you just got to sit in your victory. This is a bad example. I am being a poor example of a winner right now because sometimes when you win, you just got to sit in your victory and you got to let people say what they're going to say. Like you don't got to respond to everything. But I'm not Dan Lanning. I'm Dominique Beaumonte. So I'm telling you from the perspective of Dominique Beaumonte, my grievances with the reaction. But one of the linebackers or somebody was saying um, that uh, Oregon's players were not as big as SEC players, but but maybe they don't need to be because you lost. You lost. You did not win. So since you did not win, why does it matter how big they are? Okay, so then there's also this narrative that like, oh yeah, we're seeing you again. And I get that. Last year, the Oregon Ducks went to Washington, the state of Washington, the beautiful state of Washington. We played the University of Washington, and we lost. We made some poor decisions in the fourth quarter, right? We were poor. We managed the clock poorly. We took risk in the second half or in the second quarter, at the end of the second quarter, that we had to pay for at the end of the game, right? It was our fault. We were poorly coached. We learned from our mistake, and we tried to create this narrative that and other people contributed to the narrative too, that we're going to play Washington again in the Pac-12 tournament and we're going to see it again. And we did. We met them again in the Pac-12 tournament and we lost in the same manner. And all the Oregon folks, I think, we accept that defeat. We're not in denial about that defeat. We were not the best team. We probably were the best team on the field during that first game, and we made poor decisions. And we played well enough to play them again in the championship. But when we played them again in the championship, I guess the question is, did we learn from the first loss when it comes to the decisions that we made? I don't know. And we lost in the Pac 12 championship. Of course, Washington would go on to play in the national championship as they deserved to do so. And we played Liberty in some other bowl. I don't know, right? Which, from my perspective, was a little bit of a disaster, but at least we won. I think that's important to our brand to win, et cetera, et cetera. But for people to say, "Oh yeah, we're gonna iron it all out in the next game when Oregon plays," so I heard somebody say, uh, "Yeah, if Oregon wouldn't have won if it was on a neutral field." Okay, but it wasn't on a neutral field. It because in the way that I think that for those of you who Maybe you're new to football. Maybe you're new to paying attention to the University of Oregon, and I do not fault you for that. Maybe you needed Oregon to be in the Big Ten to really understand our greatness. I don't know. But if you carry this idea that Oregon somehow only won because Austin is loud and 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 if it wasn't at Autzen, we don't know if it was on neutral field. You have to remember that 2 or 3 years ago, the University of Oregon went to Ohio State and beat Ohio State on their home field by a touchdown. Now we are, what is it? We've played them 11 times. We've won twice and lost 9 times. Most notably, we the first championship with this new playoff system featured Oregon beat Florida State. And ended up playing Ohio State in the national championship, and they whipped us up in the national championship. And then a few years later, we go down to Ohio State, we beat them, and it was a great victory. And then this year they come. So, and then you look at this stat, which is mind-boggling because it's like somebody is not being realistic about. And let me know that the last time that we played Ohio State at Ohio State, who was the coach? The coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes when we played them in 2001 or 21 or 22 or whenever it was the Ryan Day, the same coach, which brings me to this statistic that I came across, and you probably seen it too, that says that Ryan Day is 2-6 when it comes to games against top 5 teams. That means that 8 times Ryan Day, as the head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes, has had the opportunity to win a top 5 matchup. And of those times, only 2 times he was successful. Maybe Ryan Day is the problem. Maybe Ryan Day, because and here's the thing: I mentioned the University of Washington for the purposes of communicating to you that sometimes coaches have a difficult time defeating a team twice in one season because ultimately, and I'll take it a step further. Not only were we outcoached by DeBoer or whatever his name is, the University of Washington coach, who is failing miserably, in my opinion, at Alabama. But that could just be, I don't know. Actually, let me say it this way: DeBoer or whatever his name is, he coaches Alabama just how he coached Washington. And if you go back, this is for you Alabama faithful, because I just do not want you to be disappointed. I want you to anticipate that you will have some hard day. He is whatever the coach was that you had. I'm not even going to say his name because he picked Ohio State to win on game day, and I think he is. What's his name? The Alabama coach. Anyway, not going to go there. If you go back and look at how they barely won a lot of the game, Washington barely won a lot of games. Now, they won some big ones. They won the ones that mattered, clearly. They went to the national championship. Didn't go well for them, but they won the ones that matter. But if you look at some of those games, they really, really struggle. And I think it's important for especially SEC folks. You can learn a lot about DeBoer or whatever his name is by going back to look at how he coached in really difficult games at Washington. It was not given, we're going to win at Alabama. And all of my friends who are connected to Alabama are stressed out, as they should be. I think one of my friends told me that he just doesn't have the energy, and he doesn't. Anyway, I'm not going to go there. But I just want to, I don't even remember what my point was. I got lost in whisper-jigger. Anyway, You can make a mistake. It's hard to beat the same team twice. But I just don't want us to carry this narrative that somehow like Oregon and Ohio State are going to meet again on this neutral field, and that's somehow going to prove that Oregon didn't deserve to win the first time. That is a false claim. And then I also want us to consider that whatever challenges that Ohio State has had on the road or whenever they're playing these top five teams, do not underestimate Penn State. Do not underestimate their ability to also outcoach the Ohio State Buckeyes. And I want to know, I believe that the Penn State coach is an African American guy. So I personally am a big supporter of, well, actually, I shouldn't say I'm a big supporter of them. When I was young, I just love Joe Paterno. I mean, I love everything about his coaching style. I love like the old guys that are still in the game, still coaching. I think that that is, um, I think it's great when every coach is not 30. I mean, I think I'm praising God for my 30 something year old coach. But anyway, I like when the old guys are still in the game, still impacting the system. But the other thing that I really like is when African American men who played the game well are able to coach, and that's why I shouldn't have no drama with Deion Sanders. I would be okay with Deion Sanders. I want Deion Sanders to win most of the time, but I just don't like that he alleged that Oregon cheated somehow, and that's why we beat them, even though he only won 4 games and didn't make that allegation against any other team that also mobs them, right? But I even want him to do well sometimes, depending on who he's playing. 9 times out of 10, I want him to do well. Um, so anyway, because I want him to keep his job, I care about the black students, athletes that are on his teams, and such and such and such and such, and blah blah blah. But anyway, I just want to close out by saying this: that you gotta take into consideration all the narratives, all the biases, why things are being said the way that they're being said, who's trying to protect themselves, and what excuses that these coaches are making from after they have failed to appropriately manage the clock, after they have failed to appropriately have a game plan ready to play games. Like when they say after these losses that they take full responsibility, they need to stick with that all week. If you take full responsibility for your inability to lead your team to victory, I don't care if it's by 1 point or 1,000 points, it's your fault. Okay. Um, and a loophole, taking advantage of a loophole, is not cheating. And we need to be looking at the whole game because, again, in case you weren't watching in the beginning, to say that the Oregon and Ohio State game comes down to one play at the end or 2 plays at the end is false. They benefited from a whole touchdown when there was clearly an interception. Go ahead and look up Ohio State interception versus Oregon. Look it up. Look it up, and you put in the chat after you look it up whether you believe that that drive was legitimate. Now, Oregon made its own set of mistakes because some people say, "Oh, this would have changed and this would have changed. Ohio State would have won by blah 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 zillion million points." That game, let's say Oregon didn't miss a field goal, and Oregon scored every time it was in the red zone, um, and that call was reversed. Let's say Ohio State kicked that field goal at the end of the game. Oregon would have still won by 10 points. I mean, you can look at it's clear that that game was Oregon's to lose, and it was Oregon's to lose. And from my perspective, the referees gave Ohio State an edge, and Dan Lanning and co had to both outcoach the referees and Ryan Day. So you be the judge. But I just thought I'm gonna clearly articulated my argument for all the foolishness that's going on in college football. And I look at the polls are so okay. I said I was going to be done, but I'm going to keep talking about Oregon is 6-0. We had a difficult game. Our first two games were difficult, but they weren't that difficult because if you look at the top 10 teams, especially whether they got one or two losses, all the top 10 teams, with the exception of maybe I don't know, I'm not going to even mention Miami because Miami should be a one-loss team too. They should have lost to Cal. They did lose to Cal. In my mind, they lost to Cal. And that is me considering the totality of the entire game, the entire outcome, what happened. To me, Cal won that game, and Miami got a little bit of help. But if you look at the top 10 teams, it's clear that all of them have had one or two rough games that didn't look. All of them have had a rough game. For some strange reason, when Oregon played Idaho, and it wasn't looking like people thought it should look, the voters said Oregon is not good enough to be in the top three. We're going to make them 7. Then the next week, they played a very, 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 very good Boise State team. Now, when Boise State and Idaho, for that matter, continue to be successful in games that they have played week after week after week, that should tell you something about the competition. And somebody said this too, and I think that the reason why when you hear people say this, they're normally trying to defend the SEC. From my perspective, somebody said that, we should never judge a team by September games or the first 3 weeks of football, right? We should never judge a team based on the first 3 weeks. They're generally talking about trying to protect a conference that generally plays some wild games. But at the end of the day, we don't really know who's good in college football until the end of the season, right? We recollect that. Oregon, both the teams that people say struggled, that we struggled against, both of those teams have experienced tremendous success. Boise State is ranked in the top 15 or 16 or 17, maybe, and marching higher, right? They are a team that analysts have said can be a playoff level team. They're even a team, sorry, my window's open. They're even a team that people have said could potentially play Oregon again in the playoffs, right? That's how good they are. They've got Ashton Genty or whatever his name is, and this guy is averaging over 150 yards per game. Like he's a monster. He's somebody that is ranked high amongst guys that could win the Heisman. Like he's a strong player, right? If you look at our body of work in comparison to some of these other teams, and as the weeks go on, the teams that we have struggled against are teams that are experiencing tremendous success. And their only losses for the most part, now I don't know. Okay, Google, who was I talking about? Did Idaho win this weekend?
On Saturday, Idaho will play Cal Poly at the Kibbe Dome at 1 p.m.
Okay, Google, what is Idaho's record?
Idaho is 6th in the Big Sky Football Conference with 4 wins and 3 losses for a winning percentage of 57%.
Okay, well, then Idaho don't count. I didn't know they had lost on weekend. But anyway, not worried about Idaho. Maybe I'm not looking at the right Idaho. I'll talk to you later. But Boise State is the real deal, right? And a lot of the teams that were supposed to be good in the first 3 or 4 weeks are not the real deal. And they, so a Clemson loss should look different by now. Anybody that Michigan beat should look different by now, right? Anybody that USC beat, that win should look different by now, right? All those SEC teams that they had stacked in the top, like that should look different now, because we have time, especially in college football. Time exposes your true ability to win, and so look over and I think I found interesting, and I should stop. I found interesting. Do you all ever go and check out that the the poll that comes out? Um, the poll that comes out. Oh, they show you how all AP voters or coaches poll voters vote and how they rank. It's a very interesting thing to see. Like, first of all, like the biases, and sometimes those biases are connected to where, like, I noticed in the poll that coaches who have coached with other coaches generally are uh, view that team as favorable. So an example is um, Georgia coaches, Memphis coaches, Alabama coaches tend to favor Oregon in the Northwest because Dan Lanning coached at Memphis, Alabama, and Georgia, right? But then some of those coaches are displaced. So there's a lot of favoritism and bias in a lot of these a lot of these polls that we don't know about, right? And then the AP poll are analysts, they're journalists, right? So that's the journalistic perspective. I don't know. Sometimes I yield more to the AP poll because my assumption is that journalists have more time to watch football before they vote over the weekend, right? They can watch 5 or 6 games. A coach is focused on their own game, right? So they not only haven't seen half of the games, they're making a judgment based on scores and people that they know, and conference affiliation. So their judgment is not necessarily based on the fact that they watched the games. Whereas AP voters have likely watched 3 to 4 games on the average Saturday with the intention of trying to see who is really the best team, of who's passing the eye test, if you will. So don't know how I got on that. I think I should start a sports podcast, but I need somebody to argue with. You know who I could argue with? But no, he's a USC person, and USC arguing with a USC person is like arguing with like I don't even know. Maybe Lincoln Riley USC people are easier to argue with because ain't no way that you don't know the real deal. Okay. Okay, tell me what you think. Tell me what you think. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. If you watch this or you're watching this, please hit that heart button. Also, I have a podcast called Season with Salt that you're listening to. Check out my website, seasonwithsaltpodcast.com. I have some wonderful, inspirational episodes I usually share. This is kind of the first time that I ever spent some time talking about athletics. It's normally not something that I talk about, but clearly it's something that I care about. So I thought I would do it this time. All right. All right. I'm signing off. Go Ducks. Have a good day. And let's continue the dialogue. Be blessed.